You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn and Company. I'm your host, Tim Dooner. Thank you for pressing play. This will probably be our last show before the holiday. So, from myself and Aborn and Company to you and yours, have a happy and healthy Thanksgiving. Man, and to those who have to work through the holiday, I've been there. The supply chain never sleeps, especially when you have perishable fish air freight. Yeah, Let's go on theme for a second here. What's the greatest logistical error one can commit on Thanksgiving, in your opinion? Email me that answer, tdooner@abornandco.com. For me, I'm going with forgetting to get whipped cream for the pumpkin pie. To me, that's even worse than no gravy for the turkey. I don't eat pumpkin pie very often, but when I do, I so look forward to having that whipped cream on top. It is not the same naked. Since the holidays are coming up, I thought I would do some tidying of my own. My mailbox is overflowing, and since I have received so many great questions, let's knock out as many as we can. This may be a two-parter, as there's 3 meaty topics we're going to get into today. Namely, Incoterms and specialized carriers for the aforementioned frozen goods and for furniture. Note that all of these answers will be transcribed and given their own articles available at abornandco.com/blog. So put your pencils down, enjoy the show, then catch up with those articles on the site. To quote Marvin Gaye, or Mills Lane if you prefer, let's get it on. Our first question comes in from Nigel H. from Canterbury, England. Nigel asks, I am a university student studying supply chain. However, I have a hard time understanding Incoterms and how they apply to shipments. Well, Nigel, thanks for writing in. I'd be happy to help you out with this one. Let's make a deal, though. If this explanation helps you understand Incoterms better, next time I'm in the UK, if I need a local guide, you'll be my first call. I've only been to London twice, but I adored it both times and can't wait to get back, so let's get to work. Here's some compliance science, how Incoterms work. Who listening can't get their head around Incoterms? The most important part of every import and export invoice can also be the most baffling for many shippers, buyers, and sellers. But what is it about these 3-letter abbreviations that leaves so many of us scratching our collective heads? What exactly are Incoterms? What do they mean to you? And how can you use them to your advantage? Well, international commercial terms, or Incoterms, are internationally recognized standard trade terms used in sales contracts. They're used to make sure the buyer and the seller know a few things. Who is responsible for the cost of transporting the goods, including insurance, taxes, and duties, where the goods should be picked up from and transported to, and who is responsible for the goods at each step during transportation. While there are 11 Incoterms, an easier way to think about them is to look at them as 4 groups separated by the first letter of their abbreviation. You'll see why. The abbreviations we have are the E group, the F group, the C group, and the D group. E group, that's X-Works, EXW. F, main carriage unpaid, FCA, FAS, FOB. C, main carriage paid, CFR, CIF, CPT, CIP. D, arrival, DAT, DAP, DDP. Let's start with the E group. E is for easy. This is the easiest of all for the seller. This simply means that they are selling you the goods at invoice value with no added transportation or insurance costs. You sell the goods, pack them, and make them available at your warehouse or factory, then the buyer handles the rest. While this is the least involved term for the seller, it is the most involved for the buyer, as the buyer now has to arrange everything else. In addition, the buyer assumes all risk involved as soon as the goods are picked up. F group. F is for free. Not of cost, unfortunately, but free, or cleared, to export. Here's where the buyer and the seller both begin taking responsibility for the move. On an F term, the seller would arrange inland transportation and bring the goods to the port or terminal of the buyer's choosing and clear them for export through customs. The buyer would be responsible for paying any ocean, air freight, customs, duties, and terminal fees at the port of arrival, as well as any additional transportation costs associated in getting these goods to their final destination. C Group. C is for carriage, aka freight. If you're buying on a C term, your seller is not just bringing the goods from their warehouse to the port of export, they're also paying for the overseas shipping to your named port or terminal of arrival. Once at the port, the buyer then clears customs, pays all terminal charges, and arranges delivery of the goods to their final destination. In a term like CIP, the I stands for insurance. Beware of getting your insurance through the seller, though, as they are not obligated to select an all-risk policy, leaving you with more exposure than you'd assumed. And our last group is the D group. D is for delivered. Here, the seller must pay all costs associated with getting the goods to the port or terminal of arrival. The first thing that separates the C's from the D's is that in the C terms, the buyer assumes ownership or risk of the freight once it arrives at the port or terminal. With the D term, risk ownership isn't transferred until the ship arrives at the port or terminal of arrival. D terms are also the only terms that can include both delivery to the goods' final destination as well as import customs and duty charges. So to your question though, what does this all look like laid out? Well, you may be thinking, DDP looks great, right? I pay one price, assume no risk, and the goods will show up free of any additional obligations. Well, this is true. Here could be the problem with a term like DDP. Every one of these steps along the way is a transaction. Each one of those transactions will be added to your cost of purchasing. While you may pay one price, that price is derived from the cost of all of these transactions behind it, plus any profits or margin the seller may add, of course. This can significantly increase your cost of goods in a number of ways. If your seller has poor rate contracts, adds a surcharge, or both, that could end up being rolled into your final invoice cost. It's a great place to hide things on the seller's side. In addition, you're allowing the seller to select all of your carriers along the way. Once you've paid them, their interest now shifts to getting the best rates for themselves. This could mean using less reliable carriers, slower services, and ultimately could result in delays in receiving your cargo. In addition, you'd be relying on a foreign entity to handle customs in a country that they may not be familiar with. So maybe there is some risk involved after all. So got it, right? X-Works. X-Works must be the way to go. Well, not so fast. The problem with a term like X-Works is that now you're responsible for a lot of groundwork in a country where you may not have the proper relationships in place to handle those logistics. Dealing with foreign truckers and export customs can be a nightmare for many buyers. So what's a discerning buyer to do? Well, fortunately, there are 9 other Incoterms. Many buyers find FOB to be just right. With FOB, you don't have to worry about dealing with overseas customs or truckers, but you can still pick your carriers, negotiate your own freight costs, use a local broker who knows customs at the port of arrival, and have your goods delivered to your warehouse by your preferred truckers. If you're a buyer and you use E or F terms, you control your freight volume. Significant freight volume can be used to leverage rates, create consolidations, and build routes. The same logic applies if you are a seller. Shipping can be turned into a profit center as costs can be added at the time of sale, increasing margins and giving your business a competitive advantage. What term you use depends on your situation. The most important thing is to buy and sell on the correct one. And as The Rock so emphatically used to say, know your role. If you have a robust import-export program, you likely would want to buy or import X-Works through FOB and sell export on DAT to DDP terms because of what I just said. On the buy side, you want to control the freight. On the sell side, you want to control the freight as well, especially if you want to leverage it and capture things like the data. Now, if you're buying or selling just a couple containers a year and don't have the resources to handle the logistics behind all of this, it could be to your advantage to do the reverse. Buy DAT DDP and sell X-Works FOB, as you simply don't have the volume to create leverage nor the staff to cover the workload. Knowing your invoice Incoterms is knowing your assets cost. Knowing your assets' cost is knowing your assets' value. Now, Nigel, I hope that putting it in that grouping could give you just a little bit more clarity on how these work and what their functions are. For me, that's what opened my eyes. That's what put the light in the tunnel when I just started grouping them up. And I really hope that answered your question, because I am looking forward to my walking tour of Canterbury and London. Our next question comes in from Eddie in Chicago. Hey, say hi to Theo for me over there, Eddie. He asks, I have experienced a lot of frustration vetting reefer carriers, and making matters worse is I'm not really familiar with the process. Any advice? Well, I think I can help you out here, Eddie. Here are 5 tips for keeping your cool when selecting a reefer carrier. Just a little background for you that don't know, listeners who are listening into Eddie's question here. Refrigerated trucks, also known as reefer trucks or reefers, are a cold chain solution that has sent chills down the spine of brokers the world over. But what are reefer trucks, and what is it about them that gives them that frosty reception? The term reefer simply refers to a truck, trailer, or shipping container equipped with a refrigeration unit that transports temperature-sensitive cargo. From railroad cars covered in blocks of ice in the 1840s, to ice trucks in the 1910s, to the modern fleets of today, refrigerated trucking has become one of the most vital and specialized components of the supply chain. In fact, over 90% of the food that Americans eat is hauled by refrigerated trucks. Reefers carry much more than just food, though. Other products like medicine, electronics, flowers, perfume, cosmetics, and fine art make their way via refrigerated truck, trailer, and container. Since refrigerated trucks are such an important part of U.S. commerce and cold chain solutions, it should be easy to find a carrier, right? Well, unfortunately, things are not that simple. The time-sensitive, temperature-controlled world of refrigerated shipping comes with its own set of rules and players. Unlike general and FAK, freight all kinds, cargo, reefer carriers are extremely fragmented. Since there isn't a singular network of carriers that you can plug into, shippers are often required to work out multiple carrier relationships in regions that span the length of their delivery reach. In addition, delivery is a much greater challenge. Windows are shorter, appointment times are stricter, penalties are steeper, and there is always the risk of losing some or all of the load to spoilage. But this is worth knowing, as understanding the requirements for refrigeration can help the customer and the carrier save money. So my 5 tips for you, Eddie, are geography. Before you can book anything, you're going to want to know where it is going and what needs to get there. This is true of any cargo, but even more so with reefer cargo. Not only are the full truckload and less than truckload carriers fragmented, but seasonal and ambient temperatures also must be considered. That same cargo headed to Reno in August is going to have a much different temperature consideration than a similar trailer en route to Buffalo in February. Temperature. Refrigerated trailers maintain a temperature between 55 degrees to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. How well and accurately they do so is another story, though. Once you determine the temperature range for your product, you'll then need to make sure your carrier can move and maintain their trailer within that temperature range. Not all carriers are flexible enough to move goods within a wide spectrum of temperatures. Loading. When stuffing a reefer container, you'll need to consider the commodity type and packaging being used. Since temperature is so important, it is crucial that proper airflow is maintained throughout the trailer. As a general rule, frozen cargo only requires free-flowing air to circulate around the product, whereas chilled commodities, such as fresh fruits and vegetables, require airflow through the cargo. There are several different loading techniques to achieve this, like block and palletized stowage, which allow for centralized airflow, depending upon if the cargo is loose or not. How your goods are loaded will determine how much cargo can fit in that trailer. Knowing this can help greatly towards optimizing your supply chain by properly allocating FTL and LTL shipments based on space. Technology. Now that you know your temperature needs, you'll have to work with a carrier who can not just move the cargo at that temperature, but one who can monitor it along the way. Making sure a trailer is 25 degrees when it pulls out of the lot is one thing, but knowing it's still 25 degrees in there at high noon at a rest stop in Fresno is another peace of mind entirely. Nowadays, many carriers offer remote monitoring, which is incredibly useful for more sensitive goods with much smaller temperature ranges. Whether the temperature is monitored remotely or not, you'll also want to discuss with your carrier where monitoring devices will be placed. Poor placement can lead to inaccurate readings. Other types of temperature assist, like dry ice, should also be considered depending upon the needs of the shipment. And of course, carriers who can provide clean data will go a long way in reducing spoilage by optimizing your loads. And now we're starting to bring things like IoT into there. You can start using sensors that automatically report the temperature back into your TMS system, for example. Communication. Not only do you need a carrier who can move your goods on time, at the right temperature, and to the right place, but you need one who can make the delivery appointment. Although the shipper and buyer may have agreed to a specific delivery window, once the carrier has the goods, they may try to confirm delivery outside of those agreed upon times. This can come with steep penalties, lost cargo, and spoiled relationships. It's crucial that this final detail is ironed out with the trucker, as it separates the good carriers from the great ones. You'll also want to have a clear handling guideline that outlines an out-of-temperature agreement, so there is no question who is on the hook for any carrier negligence. So Eddie, I hope those 5 tips have helped put your frustrations on ice. Next question, Gina from Jackson, New Jersey. Gina, I know Jackson very well. If you ever run the flea market circuit out that way, you may actually run into my aunt. For younger listeners, a flea market is basically eBay IRL. Anyway, Gina writes, "Hi Tim, I just got a job managing a local furniture business's freight. At my previous position, we shipped general cargo like pens and paper, but not any furniture. Is there anything I need to know before I start? Thanks in advance. Love the show." Well, thank you, Gina. That is a great question, and I admire that you're taking the time to figure this out right out of the gate. The company that hired you, they made the right decision here. Coincidentally, I have cousins right over in Freehold, New Jersey who have a moving company, so furniture has never been too far outside my periphery. I just gave Eddie 5 tips, and I'll match that with 5 tips for you as well. Here's 5 things you need to know before getting in bed with a furniture carrier. So Gina, unlike the general commodity shipments that you're used to dealing with, furniture does require specialized carriers that not only have trucks equipped to handle your loads, but also staff trained to safely move them. Since furniture requires specific equipment, care when packing and handling, and some rather unique routing, it is imperative that you understand your costs before selecting a new furniture carrier. After all, you want a carrier who is dependable, consistent, reliable, and will deliver your product intact for a great price. First tip, a leg to stand on. Whether it's your first love seat or your 1,000th dresser, it is important to find carriers who specialize in moving furniture. You may already have a great relationship with a common carrier and a preferred trucker who does an outstanding job with that general cargo. But if you haven't worked with a specialized furniture carrier, now may be the time to start. You want a company properly trained in safely moving all types of furniture. A well-trained carrier will ensure that your freight is loaded and unloaded in the best condition possible. Number 2, proper cushioning. Here, equipment is king. A proper carrier will have all of the straps, pads, wraps, and plastic needed to move and protect your freight. It is imperative that you make clear to your carrier partners what they'll be moving and what the requirements are. If you're unsure of anything, an experienced company will also be able to advise you on all of the additional requirements that may be necessary. This is important, as all special handling requirements may mean additional line items on your freight invoice, which could, in the end, drastically change your freight cost. And by proxy, erode your margins, right? Number 3, from Carolinas to customers. Much of the furniture in the US moves out of the lower mid-Atlantic area, so planning how to get your goods to your warehouse and distribution centers needs to be taken into careful consideration. The strategy used in moving your freight should align with how your carrier partners operate. Since most moves are based on volume density, this is a key area of optimization for your supply chain. Look for opportunities to build consolidations, where carriers pick up locally in the Mid-Atlantic to build larger loads to send through the United States. Number 4, in one piece. Insurance, insurance, insurance. With furniture, your exposure to risk is wide open. Not only can product be damaged at any point during transit, but the furniture itself can damage walls, doorways, elevators, etc. all during the move. It is important to elect proper coverage for your freight so you can become whole again were any damages to be incurred or caused. In addition, some locales require specific coverage and COIs, certificates of insurance, before delivery can even be made. You wouldn't want something like that delaying your moves and increasing your costs, and that's not expressly stated, especially if you're used to dealing with general cargo. Number 5, now lie in it. After taking into account all of the factors above, it's now time to negotiate your billing and rates. If you are a furniture retailer, you may have merchandise suppliers adding freight charges to their invoice. This means that the shipper pays the freight company, then bills the customer the actual freight charge. However, just because it is common doesn't always mean it is the most cost-effective way to run your supply chain. Analyzing the broken out freight costs against market prices in those lanes is one effective strategy for lowering costs. Converting to collect freight terms, for example, with your supplier partners and negotiating directly with carriers can both reduce supply chain costs and truck congestion at your dock doors. When planning your supply chain and negotiating with carriers, consider any additional needs like direct-to-customer or interplant transfers. This is where you get the most control over your freight costs. After all, you wouldn't want to leave money on the table, or, in this case, on the bed. Thanks again for your questions, Nigel, Eddie, and Gina. I hope you and the listeners now know a bit more than when they started this podcast. As mentioned at the top of this show, all of these answers will be transcribed at abornandco.com/blog, and I'll be releasing those right after this episode comes out. I have a sack full of questions I still haven't made it to, so let's do this. We'll do another round of listener mail after Thanksgiving, and in the meantime, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, you feel free to email me at tdooner@abornandco.com. That's TDOONER@abornandco.com. I'd be happy to learn something new with you. Looking to future-proof your supply chain? Get ready for tomorrow today with Aborn & Company's Advantage Modern Managed Freight Solutions. For a complimentary consultation, just visit abornandco.com and contact us. Find out how we've combined traditional freight management fundamentals with data and technology to negotiate over $5 billion in client freight expenses. Isn't it time you got optimized? For this episode and all of our previous shows, visit consultinglogistics.io or simply search for Consulting Logistics on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And hey, if you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. That's it. We're out of time, folks. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. For Nigel, Eddie, and Gina, I'm Tim Dooner, saying take care and happy shipping.